The Bush administration's open borders policy and its decision to ignore the enforcement of this country's immigration laws is part of a broader agenda. President Bush signed a formal agreement that will end the United States as we know it, and he took the step without approval from either the U.S. Congress or the people of the United States. Bill Tucker reports.
The Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America sounds benign, hardly like a policy that critics call NAFTA on steroids. It's a deal that few have even heard of.
It's being done again by very few people at the very top on behalf of the investment class, but the working class of people, political officials across our country, from communities, from cities and so forth, they don't know anything about this.
Yet it was agreed to by Mexico's President Fox, Canada's Prime Minister Martin, and President Bush in 2005. Administration officials counter their critics by saying everything about SPP is on the White House website. And they say the partnership is not a treaty, but more of an outline of priorities between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Still, some wonder why there haven't been public discussions about the goals being pursued.
This SPP includes, for instance, a committee that is sitting down to harmonize our meat inspection and food safety. So how far away from a trade agreement can your dining room table and what you feed your kids be?
Other parts of the agreement mention border security as an issue, which include all of North America. In fact, the name of the agreement is not Security and Prosperity of the United States, but of North America.
When we elect officials, we expect them to act on our behalf. When we get involved in cooperative frameworks with other countries for joint regulation of fisheries or rail transportation or the skies, we're basically sharing our sovereignty with that government and outsourcing some of what we give our elected officials.
As disturbing as some find SPP, there is legislation in the House introduced by Florida's Katherine Harris that closely resembles the goals of the partnership. Included in that bill is a section which calls for the securing of Mexico's southern border by the United States and Canada. Lou, that's not the border with the United States. That's the border they share with Belize and Guatemala.
The idea that the White House would respond that this is on their website, this involves intricate workings amongst the Commerce Department of this country and Canada and Mexico's, of course. A regional prosperity and security program. This is absolute ignorance. And the fact that we reported this, we should point out, when it was signed. But as we watch this thing progress, these working groups are continuing, they're intensifying. What in the world are these people thinking about?
Well, they say, look, these are a declaration and an outline of our priorities. And when I called them today, Lou, they said I was the first phone call they had received literally since the deal was first signed. So people are not paying attention, and they're letting them, in fact, get away with this.
You know, I was asked the other day about whether or not I really thought the American people had the stomach to stand up and stop this nonsense, this direction from a group of elites in absolute contravention of our law, of our Constitution, every national value. And I hope, I pray that I'm right when I said yes. But this is beyond belief. Bill Tucker, thank you very much. It brings us to the subject of our poll tonight. Do you think maybe somebody should take a vote if we're going to merge the United States with Canada and Mexico? Maybe, you know, people like you and me vote. Yes, or integration of Mexico, the United States, and Canada. More meetings are scheduled. It is an aggressive agenda proposed at the highest levels of our government and U.S. commerce without congressional or voter oversight.
There are several ways it could go. One is modeled after the EU. One is modeled after sort of an economic community. It's beyond the scope of just a free trade zone, which we fairly well have already with those two countries.
This partnership is being driven by the U.S. business community, which envisions ships from China docking in Mexico instead of California. Mexican truck drivers transporting cargo on a NAFTA superhighway all the way to Canada. A cornerstone of this model is a guest worker immigration program that relaxes U.S. borders.
Which would have allowed close to 100 million immigrants into the country, most of them low-skilled, over the next 20 years. That will in fact bankrupt the United States.
Those concerned with integrating the economies point to the disparities. The U.S. GDP per capita is $43,500. Canada, $35,200. Mexico, only $10,600. The average adult in the United States has 12 years of education. In Canada, 11 and a half years. Mexico, only a little over 7 years of schooling.
New economic integration. Lou?
And Congress is sitting basically on its hands, saying nothing, hearing nothing apparently, as we continue to report on this outright outrageous conduct.
And it is even possible that Congress may not even have a say. What we are hearing is that the Bush administration is trying to use NAFTA as the justification for doing a lot of this, Lou.
This is an arrogance and abuse of power that frankly this administration is laying a claim on for the history books to be written for years to come. This is outrageous. Lisa Sylvester from Washington. Texas school districts are recruiting bilingual teachers from Mexico. More than 700,000 students in the state of Texas have what are called limited English skills. School systems there say they can't find teachers with the necessary language skills locally to teach bilingually. And at a recent recruiting fair in Monterrey, Mexico, 162 applicants were hired in Mexico by more than 20 Texas school districts.
After 9/11, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico began what they call the Security and Prosperity Partnership, aimed at beefing up security on the borders without halting commerce. But some conservatives see it as a grand conspiracy by President Bush and others to erase our borders with Mexico and Canada and surrender our sovereignty to something called the North American Union. Chief Washington correspondent Jim Angle reports.
The Bush administration is merging our sovereign, independent nation that our ancestors fought for. They're getting it away.
There is a fervent belief among some conservatives that President Bush is planning to dissolve the borders with Canada and Mexico as part of a secret effort to form what is called a North American Union.
I call it a stealth process. That's why I say the president is engineering, as it were, almost a coup d'etat, almost a change of government into a regional structure.
It is going to negate the sovereignty of the United States of America, and it certainly has grave concerns for our Constitution as well.
Those who subscribe to this idea use words like unconstitutional and even treason to describe what they see as an effort to create here something like the European Union with a single currency. The man some call the godfather of a North American Union, though, says the whole effort was simply a search for how to efficiently deal with 500 million legal border crossings every year, as well as massive trade.
Last year, there was $926 billion in trade among the three countries. It's the largest amount of trade among any three countries in the world.
And he argues none of the changes people fear could possibly go into effect without passing through Congress.
All of these require the assent of Congress in all three countries. All of them would entail a very large debate in three countries. None of this could be done by stealth.
Some other conservatives aren't charging treason but do have questions. Chris Farrell of Judicial Watch got some documents on the SPP through the Freedom of Information Act.
With little or no oversight, there are folks who will run amok, that they will exceed their authority, that they will go too far.
Michael Medved argues that buying into such nonsense, as he put it, does nothing but discredit conservatives. But Jerome Corsi wants a congressional investigation, and a few in Congress agree. Meanwhile, an administration official says rumors about a North American Union are completely false, that all that is going on is nothing more than an effort to coordinate better with our neighbors. Brett?
Well, we'll keep an eye on this, Jim. Thanks very much.
Going ahead with the North American Union NAFTA Superhighway program, despite telling the public that first it didn't exist and then the legislature shot it down twice. It affects the entire nation, but begins down in Mexico through Texas up into Canada. They even have the whole highway planned out with the highway markers for all the way into Canada, but then when you talk about it, they say it doesn't exist. They've been building the NAFTA superhighway from Mexico into Texas and up into Oklahoma. It's all over the news here, and they go on CNN over the years. I've played the clips and go, Ron Paul isn't saying there is no Trans-Texas Corridor NAFTA superhighway, when it's all Department of Transportation and publicly admitted and billboards up everywhere. Then they go, it doesn't exist. And then they say, oh, we're not going to build it now, and then they sign an order and bring it back in, even though the legislature said no, because they're having the states go and pay for it with taxpayer money. And then the globalists get the tax money off the toll roads. Dr. Jerome Corsi is going to join us for the balance of the hour, and I appreciate him coming on. We're going to get into this. We're going to get into his article where Perry is still doing public-private partnerships, Trans-Texas, NAFTA superhighway in pieces. And people say, I was on Mancal yesterday, and he said, well, why is it important if it's in Texas? He was asking a rhetorical question. He knew why. A really smart guy, Eric Muller. And I said, Eric, there's 40-plus major interstate highways, another 40 other corollary roads that they, in the official Department of Transportation documents, say they want to take over, put taxes on, and fund the North American Union with. And it's an artery right down to the Pacific side of Mexico, with the biggest port now in the hemisphere to bring in Chinese goods. And it's an international corridor, like the Romans used roads to control things. And I made the film Endgame, Blueprint for Global Enslavement, almost 3 hours long. About 30 minutes of it is on this subject. And it shows Bush giving speeches saying we've merged the North American Union with the EU, all the agreements. I mean, we're already way down the hole here. So all of that's going on. And that's what this is about. We're already under a North American Union. But the states twice voted it down. Texas is the main funding artery to fund it all the way up into Canada. They've got mile markers all the way to Canada. It's marked for mile markers all the way for something like 2,000 miles. But they just call it the I-35 shoot-around outside Austin. But it goes all the way to San Antonio. It's there. And CNN, I've played the clips, you've seen it, would say Ron Paul 4 years ago is insane. There is no Texas superhighway. There is no Trans-Texas Corridor. We had billboards all over the state with a cowboy going, I like the Trans-Texas Corridor, and paying tolls. And they had ads going, yeah, it's Trans-Texas Corridor. Texas is proud to be part of the NAFTA superhighway system. I'd go to movies and see ads before the movies going, Texas is a proud part of the North American Union. I appreciate all you're doing. Meanwhile, we go, hey, we don't want this. It doesn't exist. And that's a psychological warfare term called gaslighting. And Dr. Corsi can break this down. He, of course, has worked for the State Department and national security and classified areas. He has a Harvard Ph.D. in political science. He's worked for, Fortune, top mega banks, you name it. I'm not going to go over his whole bio. He's got, 3 or 4 #1 New York Times bestsellers. Dr. Corsi, how bad is it? It's even worse than I thought it would be. What is your take? Why is it moving so quickly? I mean, it is like the dam has broken.
Well, I think it's a rush to the finish line. I think the New World Order sees an opportunity. With the article I wrote in the WorldNet Daily, WND, just over the holidays, it's clear that Governor Perry, with the Trans-Texas Corridor, that it's back. I mean, I researched it and found that now there's something like $20 billion in road work underway throughout Texas on these public-private partnerships. That's the key idea, the public-private partnership. In other words, and typically three of these deals I looked at in particular, this State Highway 130 near San Antonio, extensions of I-35 around Dallas-Fort Worth, Cintra, C-I-N-T-R-A in Spain, which was the company that was going to do the full development of the Trans-Texas Corridor, the 4,000 miles that Governor Perry proposed before we exposed it, and they had to withdraw the plan in disgrace. But the Cintra is going to build these highways on 50-year leases, where, for instance, let's say Cintra puts up $5 billion. The state of Texas subsidizes with $1 billion. Cintra builds the extension to the road. Now they're doing it piece by piece. And Cintra gets to run the toll road for 50 years on a 50-year lease, and Cintra in Spain collects the tolls from the motorists driving in Texas. And again, this was something that Governor Perry said he'd put an end to. 2009, there was a pledge to end the Trans-Texas Corridor with Cintra.
Well, don't forget, you've seen the clips where CNN just said it didn't even exist.
Right, exactly. I mean, they're still denying that any of this planning exists, or that, you know, Winnipeg up in Canada has been declared by Prime Minister Harper to be an inland port, and they're building the same infrastructure.
What's incredible is the meetings, the maps, all of it's 100% public, and then they first announced it even in, you know, Time Magazine, and then when we don't like it, they go, "You're crazy, that doesn't exist."
Well, they deny it. They laugh about it. They, you know, if you remember up in Montebello in Canada, when you know, they were asked, Harper and Bush, at that time, the president of Mexico, three of them meeting in the Security and Prosperity Partnership, if there was going to be a NAFTA superhighway that was going to combine the three nations in this continent, North America, into an international transportation system. And Harper laughed at it and he said, "Oh yes, it may be intraplanetary." And then, of course, he comes out and announces that Winnipeg is going to be an inland port, and that the government of Canada is committed to building an international transportation structure that ties into trade in China.
And I know Dr. Corsi's been on this even more than I have, but watching in Texas, they don't even follow their agreements. In fact, most of the new toll road stuff is built off existing toll roads on roads they're not even supposed to put them on. They break the law and do that. Bush signed an executive order. I guess they say that makes it all right. I guess they could sign an executive order saying the moon was made of cheese. And then most of these new roads get paid for with taxpayer money, and then Cintra just gets the money. But I want to get into that, and that's why I originally asked the guys to get you on, Dr. Corsi, and I appreciate you coming on. But what about the overall? I want to go back into it. I know you're focused on this now, but take on that. I want to go back into the NAFTA Superhighway because it ties in to this tactic now that those of us that are awake go, this is ridiculous and discrediting that they announced there's no global government being formed, but in hundreds of financial papers they brag how they're forming a world government run by private banks. So why are they doing that? Well, because we're in full
hypocrisy and the lying of the New World Order and this Bill Ayers left, that this Obama left, has never been greater. They're lying about everything, saying, "Oh no, we don't have a NAFTA superhighway. There's no public-private partnerships here." Then you look and you find there's $20 billion of deals that Governor Perry has signed with with Cintra in Spain.
No, they bragged in the AP years ago. They said Perry's just going ahead in chunks. I mean, it's not a secret. They just laugh at us. Incredible. Just stay there, Doc. We got to go to break. I want to come back and get...
But the advantage we've got is the truth. And I think if we keep going back to it, I mean, every one of the articles I write, Alex, I footnote. I've got all kinds. You can go look at the original sources. That's what, made the articles of the North American Union, going back to when I was writing the late great USA in 2005, 2006, so powerful, was I linked to their own documents, the government's own documents.
Well, similar to the EU, the European Union, the president was asked about this today at the summit meeting with the leaders of Mexico and Canada.
This won't be another treaty that will have to be approved by the various parliaments or elected bodies of the government?
Precisely, and it's actually been designed that way, in various declassified documents from the SPP meetings over the last couple of years have specifically said that the time is not right for another big public debate, and this should be done by stealth.
You don't make decisions like that as an individual. You vent them through the democratic process. And I think that this idea of having open borders with Mexico would destroy the United States of America as we know.
Representatives of the United States, Canada, and Mexico preparing for a summer meeting to further the goals of the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America, the SPP, which many consider to be simply a blueprint for the North American Union, would weaken U.S. laws and regulations and diminish American sovereignty. Kitty Pilgrim has our report.
President Bush, former Mexican President Vicente Fox, and former Canadian Prime Minister Paul Martin
conceived the Security and Prosperity Partnership between the three countries in 2005. A summit is scheduled in Canada later this summer to flesh out more details, but current information on any agreements is scarce.
The Security and Prosperity Partnership will deliver neither security nor prosperity for the simple reason that it's not so far been democratic. Most of the discussions have been taking place behind closed doors.
Just can't get away from everybody talking about this NAFTA superhighway. Yeah, nobody's talking about it. This is a giant roadway that will run across the United States connecting Canada and Mexico. Why is no one talking about it? Because no one will admit to it. It's only crazy people like me that have even mentioned it, dare mention it on the air.
The President has attended secret meetings and signed at least 2 agreements under the Security and Prosperity Partnership Program. Information leaked out about the meetings, and now it is all in the open. No treaty has been signed, so Congress has not become involved. However, money from our Treasury is now being spent for this effort. We will have a new currency, the Amero, and a new constitution.
Email from Mrs. Gonzalez in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Mr. Fox, I'd like to know how you feel about the possibility of having a Latin America united with one currency.
Long term, very long term. What we proposed together, President Bush and myself, it's ALCA, which is a trade union for all of the Americans.
Everyone will say, no, this isn't happening, but they won't deny the pieces of it. It's exactly like what they did with the amnesty bill. They couldn't get it through in one big bill, so they're breaking up like the DREAM Act, and they're putting it in piece by piece. Am I wrong?
You're exactly right. It's a play on words. I had the opportunity to ask the Secretary of Transportation some questions before the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee in the U.S. House. I believe she used the word NAFTA-related highways and highways that would increase our trade with Mexico and other countries south of our border. But I define it as a NAFTA superhighway, and NAFTA really, when it began back in the early 90s, it dreamed this, and those dreams are back to become a reality.
I think one thing people who are dollar-based need to focus on is the Amero. That's the one thing that nobody's talking about, but I think it's going to have a big impact on everybody's life in Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. If you Google it, you'll find out all about it.
Well, you could tell us a little bit more right now.
You always hear it on CNBC, don't you? The Amero is the proposed new currency for the North American community, which is being developed right now between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico to make a borderless community, much like the EU, and the dollar, Canadian dollar, U.S. dollar, and the Mexican peso replaced by the Amero.
You really think that will get any leeway?
You may want to visit a couple of websites and see how far along it is. The Canadians are pretty upset about it, whereas the Americans, apart from the Texans, are the only people who know anything about it. The rest of the public's really sort of with their head in the sand on this one.
Okay, interesting. I mean, we've already got NAFTA, the free trade zone, isn't it? I mean, is that working? Is that doing enough?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's created a lot of illegal immigrants coming across the border. I don't know. You get the pros and cons on this thing. NAFTA, for some people, is a very good thing. For other people, it's been a disaster. And I think this is one way that the politicians are trying to work themselves out of what potentially could be a disastrous situation going forward.
This is an ideological battle. Some people believe in globalism. Others of us believe in national sovereignty. And there is a move on toward a North American Union, just like early on there was a move on for a European Union, and it eventually ended up. So we had NAFTA and moving forward a NAFTA highway. These are real things. It's not somebody made these up. It's not a conspiracy. They don't talk about it, and they might not admit about it, but there's been money spent on it. There was legislation passed in the Texas legislature unanimously to put a hold on it. They're planning on millions of acres taken by eminent domain for an international highway from Mexico to Canada, which is going to make the immigration problem that much worse.
You know, I've heard all the rhetoric, and you've heard it too, about how this is amnesty. Amnesty means that you've got to pay, you know, a price for having been here illegally, and this bill does that.
This president is not representing the interests of the American people when it comes to immigration. He has he thinks that it will be good for our country. I have no doubt, I'm not questioning his patriotism. I'm sure, no doubt, he believes that opening up some sort of borderless region on the North American continent between Mexico, the United States, and Canada will in some way benefit us because we'll have cheaper labor, we'll have natural resources, we will be able to withstand any competition. I'm sure that he thinks that's what's best for the United States.
What you need is a little bit of solidarity, a little bit of human attitude of working together as a team.
Would you like to see a North American Union? So what's your team? You'd go with Mexico,
long-term, yes,
U.S.,
partners.
Canada?
The combining of national governments started with the European Union. That union started with trade agreements, then a common currency, the euro, and now a European Parliament that is feverishly passing laws that override the laws of the member nations. Now it's North America's turn. Building on the North American Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA section of the Commerce Department is busy drafting laws and regulations for a North American Union, a union of Canada, America, and Mexico.
I want to switch gears, talk about this other issue that's out there, the creation of a new North American Union, if you will.
Robert Pastor is an author of the Council on Foreign Relations document seen as the project's roadmap.
We need to deepen economic integration by moving towards a customs union with a common external tariff. I think we need to enhance our security by beefing up both our borders and beefing up a continental boundary.
But critics fear an attack on American sovereignty, a super NAFTA with borders erased between three very different countries with no public oversight. Texas Congressman Ron Paul is a rare voice of concern on Capitol Hill.
We're not supposed to give this to the executive branch devising quasi-type of treaties that the Congress seems to not have any control of, and then it turns out to be managed trade for big corporations and not to benefit to our workers and to our people.
A trans-international highway that some secret forces are planning between Mexico and Canada that is a figment of his imagination.
It's not so much as a sinister conspiracy, it's just knowledge is out there. If we look for it, you'll realize that our national sovereignty is under threat.
Good morning. Buenos dias. Bonjour. Nice to be here with everybody, and I'm particularly delighted to welcome my friends and North American counterparts, Secretary Meade and Minister Baird. We're happy to have them in Washington here today. I have had a chance to meet bilaterally a number of times with both the Secretary and the Minister, but this is the first time that we've been able to meet, all three of us, trilaterally, since I became Secretary of State. And I'm very grateful to both of them for making the trip here. And I hope, as I said to them today, to visit their countries, both of them, very, very soon. During my years in the Senate, and certainly since becoming Secretary, I've often found myself in absolute awe about how extraordinary this continent really is. While we often wind up traveling to trouble spots in the world, the truth is that North America is a remarkable, remarkable unity of three very important and powerful countries that share values and interests and are operating on those values and interests every single day. We are three nations separated by peaceful borders. And we are neighbors, we're partners, and we come together to confront the full range of challenges that we face, and believe me, this is something that is not every day, everywhere in the world today. Together, North American nations are promoting democracy and our shared values at home and around the globe. We're encouraging daily our cooperation on matters of international peace and security. We work together on non-proliferation, on Syria, on Middle East peace, on a host of different challenges to our security. And we're also collaborating to address all of them more effectively than any of us could do alone. And that's the power of North America in this relationship. Through initiatives like the North America-Central America Security Dialogue, we're also working to improve citizen security throughout the Western Hemisphere and beyond. And we're reducing the impact of natural disasters. We're providing assistance in the face of health, humanitarian challenges. We've launched trilateral initiatives like the North American Plan for Animal and Pandemic Influenza, which was critical during the H1N1 outbreak of 2009 and remains intact today in order to help us address similar challenges should they arise at any moment. We're also taking steps to support economic growth that is inclusive, shared. Just a few weeks ago, we marked the 20th anniversary of NAFTA. And I think we have learned a couple of important lessons that can help inform the vision of NAFTA. The first lesson is free trade works. In a world where economic policy is foreign policy, free trade is a key ingredient for shared prosperity, for shared growth, and shared security. Every single day, the United States does more than $3.4 billion of trade in our NAFTA partnership. And that is about a third of all the trading that we do. It is done between this partnership. More than $1 trillion of trade a year, more than $100 billion of trade a month. That is more trade than we engage in with Brazil annually. And each month we do more trade than we engage with India annually, just to give you a sense of the vitality of this partnership. Over the past 20 years, we have opened up a new North American marketplace. We have integrated supply chains and reimagined entire industries from agriculture to aerospace. Today, North America is far more than the sum of three economies. It's the collective output of what has become a fully integrated manufacturing center. If you buy a car in Mexico, it may well have been assembled in Canada and contain made in America parts. There are workers in Wichita, Kansas, putting the finishing touches on aircraft that contain fuselages assembled in Mexico and engines built in Canada. This kind of economic integration is benefiting all three of our nations economically and has also improved living standards and working conditions across the board. I will tell you, because I was involved in the NAFTA debate in the United States Senate, I remember how intense that debate was. It divided America, and we could never really have envisioned, even in the best arguments, what has happened in those 20 years. The second lesson that we can learn from the past couple of decades is that globalization isn't slowing down anytime soon. And no matter how much there is some dislocation, and we acknowledge there can be, the fact is that no political leader, no country can put that genie back in the bottle. When I joined my fellow senators in supporting and ultimately passing NAFTA, we didn't do it because it was easy. We did it because we believed it was a risk worth taking, and it has proven true. NAFTA was at the vanguard of the wholly interconnected world that we face today. And as I always say, nobody has any way of transforming the realities of this desire of people everywhere to have better jobs, more education, more opportunity that comes with that opening up. So yes, globalization can be a challenge, but it really has meant that our countries have to be more dynamic. We have to be more competitive. We have to be more innovative. That's not always easy. But globalization is an enormous opportunity. And if we can take advantage of it as we build on this strong partnership, We believe that it will help all of us to provide better opportunity and more security to our citizens. If we want to compete, we actually have to make it even easier to trade, easier for people to invest in our countries. We talked about that this morning. We talked about how we can improve the trans-border movement of both goods and of people. We talked about how the Trans-Pacific Partnership could particularly have an impact on the global economy and also be enormously beneficial to each of our economies. And if our nations want to compete, the United States, Canada, and Mexico are best approaching these challenges as partners, not as competitors. That includes on the subject of energy. I look forward to discussing with my counterparts the opportunities for energy cooperation, and we talked about that today. Ways in which we can address the enormous challenge of climate change, which we all agree in our nations must be addressed, but also how we address the question of taking advantage of the vast resources we have on this continent, bring greater energy opportunity to our citizens, but do so in ways that are environmentally sustainable and responsible. Next month, President Peña Nieto will host President Obama and Prime Minister Harper in Mexico for the North American leaders meeting. And the lessons of the past will be at the forefront of our minds. But our focus fundamentally needs to be on the future, and that's where it will be. On the growth of our markets, the strength of our partnership, the health and well-being of our people, and the security of our continent for years to come. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Good morning to all. Thank you, Secretary Kerry. Thank you, Minister Byrd. This has been, I think, a very good meeting for Mexico. It has allowed us the opportunity to talk about issues that are very relevant to the region. Just at the outset, I would like to recognize from Mexico the very long hours, the very long days that Secretary Kerry, the risks that he has taken in order to construct a better world, and I think that many of those risks have paid off, and Mexico recognizes that hard work. We had a very good meeting this morning in addressing many regional interests. I would like to thank the members of the press. Quisiera agradecer también a los corresponsales.
I would also like to thank Mexican and Hispanic correspondents for their attendance.
Of common interest to our governments. As Secretary Kerry said, the North American Leaders Summit will help drive the vision of 21st century North America. We will work towards becoming the most competitive and dynamic region in the world. We will be honored to host President Obama and Prime Minister Harper in Toluca in February. Today's meeting focused on ensuring that we are on track to deliver our commitments. We discussed many topics on how to work towards increasing our shared prosperity, our leadership on new opportunities, our international engagement, and the security of citizens in the North American region. President Peña Nieto has said repeatedly that he believes that in the 21st century North America is called on to become the most competitive and dynamic region in the world. We know that this is something that President Obama and Prime Minister Harper also share. We have many things that will support our work to make North America competitive and dynamic. As Secretary Kerry said, and I know Minister Byrd believes, we have shared values, we have shared goals, we have a working partnership that has worked to the benefit of our people, but we also are a region that enjoys an important number of competitive advantages going forward. We have as a region very competitive labor costs, we have huge transportation and logistical advantages, we have qualified and hard-working human capital, we are enjoying a new energy paradigm that people would not have envisioned some years back. We have great economies of scale due to the size and interrelation of urban areas, and we have had a framework that has worked and that has worked well. As we mark the NAFTA 20th anniversary, it's important and interesting to see the size of the results. As this press conference is going on, more than $2 million of goods are being traded every minute within our three economies. And behind that trade, there has been job creation and prosperity for the region. Mexico really looks forward to partaking in an effort to advance prosperity in the region that is both shared and inclusive. We know that we must seize new areas of opportunities that lie before us. We need to collaborate more on education, on science, on technology and innovation. We have the opportunity to work together in addressing regional concerns of better engaging with Central America, the Caribbean, and the Latin American regions. We know that by working together we can achieve more. We think that we have the regional institutions, the political framework, and the political will now in place to implement the decisions that we have taken. The North American idea, as a very good friend of Mexico and of North America, Professor Bob Pastor says, is stronger than ever. Mexico, the U.S., and Canada are working together to further our regional community, and that commitment was reaffirmed amongst all of us earlier this morning. Again, thank you, Secretary Kerry. Thank you, Minister Byrd, for your partnership in this endeavor.
Thank you very much, Secretary Meade. Mr. Byrd.
Thank you very much, John.
It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and to celebrate the good partnership and the good relations between our two countries.
Thank you for the hospitality, John. We had great discussions today celebrating 20 years of NAFTA and the huge and significant economic growth and trade that we've seen between our three countries. We also have seen the growth of our political relations with the trilateral relationship, to look what we can do to work together to see more jobs, more hope and more opportunity, what we can do to make our economies more competitive, what we can do to boost incomes, boost job creation in all three of our countries. NAFTA has been an unqualified success, and one of the great side effects is the strengthened political relationship between all three countries, where on issue after issue after issue, there's a strengthened partnership where not only are we working together, but rowing together and getting a lot farther, a lot faster than any of us could have ever have hoped 20 years ago. We had an opportunity to discuss security, border management, infrastructure. We had the opportunity to talk about regulatory cooperation, all things that can help boost job creation, and this remains a significant priority for Canada. And we look forward to the continued preparations for a successful summit. We appreciate the significant leadership from President Peña Nieto. The scale and the speed of the reforms which have taken place in his first year in office are remarkable. And we had a strong relationship with the Calderon administration, and we're very pleased with the first year of our relationship with the new administration. I want to thank you as well, John, for the significant American leadership that we have seen from you, particularly with respect to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I look forward to visiting Israel later today and tomorrow when I will leave, and to doing all we can to support your noble efforts to seek a resolution to one of, if not the most intractable issue in the world. Obviously, your leadership as well with respect to trying to bring a political solution and an end to the violence and the war of Assad against his own people is remarkable, and we will be there in Geneva to support you in those common values and efforts that we strongly support. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, John. I think we're open. Jen will manage the question.
The first question will be from Michael Gordon of the New York Times.
A question for Secretary Kerry. Sir, after you became Secretary of State, you made the point repeatedly that it was important to change Bashar al-Assad's calculation in order to achieve a political solution at Geneva II. And now, almost a year later, it's clear that the Assad regime believes its position is stronger than ever. In his letter to the United Nations, the Syrian foreign minister, who will be leading the delegation to Geneva II, suggests that the purpose of going to Geneva is to fight terrorism, not discuss a political transition. In fact, he says some points in the invitation the Syrian government received from the UN are, quote, in conflict with the legal and political position of the state of Syria. Sir, my question is, how can you expect to make progress toward a political transition at Geneva II if the Assad government does not even accept the purpose of the conference, which is what its own letter suggests, Have you been in contact with the Syrian government over the past 24 hours to obtain an assurance that it accepts the purpose of the meeting? And doesn't the Syrian foreign minister's letter mean that more pressure needs to be brought to bear on the Assad government in order to make political headway? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Yesterday I addressed directly the revisionism of the Syrian regime in its effort to try to divert the purpose, which will not be successful. More than 30 nations are going to assemble, all of whom, thus far, and if there are more, will be and must be committed to the Geneva I communique. Now, you were with me in Paris the other day when Foreign Minister Lavrov stood up and reiterated that the purpose of this conference is the implementation of the Geneva I communique. Nobody would have believed that Assad would have given up his chemical weapons. But he did. And the reason he did is that his patrons came to understand that he had to. And I believe as we begin to get to Geneva and begin to get into this process, that it will become clear that there is no political solution whatsoever if Assad is not discussing a transition and if he thinks he's going to be part of that future. It's not going to happen. The people who are the opponents of this regime will never, ever stop. There will be a low-grade insurgency at least, and worse, potentially even a civil war, if it continues, because they will not stop. Now, we also are not out of options with respect to what we may be able to do to increase the pressure and further change the calculation. And I think we've made that clear to the Russian foreign minister and others, nor are other players short of an ability to be able to have an impact here. So I think, they can bluster, they can protest, they can put out distortions. The bottom line is we are going to Geneva to implement Geneva I. And if Assad doesn't do that, he will invite greater response in various ways from various people over a period of time. So I'm not particularly, surprised that he is trying to divert this. He's been doing this for months, trying to make himself the protector of Syria against extremists, when he himself has even been funding some of those extremists, even purposefully ceding some territory to them in order to make them more of a problem so he can make the argument that he is somehow the protector against them. Nobody's going to be fooled. We're not going to be fooled by this process. So, Foreign Minister Lavrov has stated they are supporting the Geneva I communique, and the government has to come and negotiate around that communique. And since Russia is one of the primary benefactors of the Assad regime, we believe the Russians have a high stake in helping to make certain that Assad understands exactly what the parameters of this negotiation are.
Second question is for Jesus Lopez Zamorano from Agencia Notimex. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Kerry, you mentioned that you discussed how to improve the transit of goods and people here in North America. Many people here in the U.S. have been asking the three governments to update NAFTA to take into account the new reality, for example, of the recently passed energy reform in Mexico. So I'd like to get a sense of the three of you, whether your government would be willing to update NAFTA or even reopen it formally. And Secretary Kerry...
To open what?
Reopen NAFTA formally to include some new recently issues such as energy reform. And Secretary Kerry, especially for you, specifically for you, what do you respond to those who believe that at some point the U.S. should include Canada and Mexico in the TTIP negotiations, if only to avoid future conflicts between the NAFTA rules and whatever you end up agreeing with the Europeans?
Well, let me speak first. I'd like each of my guests to address this also. Over the last 20 years, as I mentioned, we've developed this incredible network of trade agreements in the Western Hemisphere. And we have long wanted to open up those benefits. I think that stepping up, all of us, to the TPP is a very critical component of sort of moving to the next tier post-NAFTA. So I don't think you have to open up NAFTA per se in order to achieve what we're trying to achieve. There are plenty of ways for us in cooperative, and we discussed a lot of them this morning, with respect to borders, with respect to regulations, with respect to energy cooperation, technology, innovation, investment. There are a host of things that we can move forward on that will take us to the next level without having to sort of go back and kind of reopen it. I think we're well engaged and looking forward to a much more robust relationship. And what we did do today was set down a series of specific items that we will follow up on quickly so that these can be the items that our presidents and prime minister wind up engaging on in the meeting in February. And I think today's meeting holds out the prospect that that can be a more productive and more specific engagement as a result. Mr. Baird?
Listen, we believe that NAFTA has been an unqualified success. The Trans-Pacific Partnership trade negotiations, which all three of us are in, offer us the opportunity to strengthen the trilateral partnership, and we're keen to use that opportunity to do so.
NAFTA has worked well on many levels. In the last 20 years, trade in the region multiplied by 3, foreign direct investment in the region multiplied by 8. Mexico is now the 3rd trading partner of both the U.S. and Canada. We're the 2nd and the 5th market of the U.S. and Canada, respectively. Just to put it in perspective, Mexico is the first market for exports of Arizona, California, and Texas. We're the 2nd largest export market for other 20 states. Again, to put the numbers in perspective, exports to Mexico just from the U.S. were larger than exports to China and Japan together. They were larger than the sum of exports to Germany, France, Holland, and the UK put together. And that is a platform over which we have an opportunity to build. I agree with what Secretary Kerry and what Minister Baird said. We do not think it is necessary to reopen NAFTA, but we think we have to build on it to construct and to revitalize the idea of a dynamic North America. North America is the single most important economic bloc today. The 3 economies standing here before you today explain about 1/3 of the world economy. We are the largest exporters of most advanced industries, and we have therefore the obligation to review how the economic process is going in such a way as to remove any obstacles for trade, investment, and economic prosperity to be a reality to the citizens of all 3 of our countries. The commitment that we have reached today will allow us to develop an agenda, to follow it through, to have mechanisms that allow for the commitments that we reach to be fully implemented. In terms of the trade relationship with Europe, at some point we will have 3 bilateral trade agreements with the European Union. It is in the interest of Mexico that those negotiations are to the benefit of the North American region. We think that that is in the best interest of Canada and the U.S. as well, and we will work to ensure that those negotiations further increase the North American competitiveness with a view eventually to having a more integrated perspective from North America and the European Union rather than just a view of 3 bilaterals.
Thank you. A question from Alex Panetta of the Canadian Press.
My question's on a bilateral matter, Canada-U.S. issue, the Keystone Pipeline. Last February, Secretary Kerry, you said you were hoping to be in a position to offer a decision on Keystone in the near future. It's been almost a year. Since then, the Canadian government has said it wouldn't take no for an answer on Keystone. This week, your Canadian interlocutor is in Washington, has repeatedly asked for a decision soon because apparently the uncertainty is becoming untenable for the oil industry. So I would ask you to answer your Canadian friend.
Well, I always answer my Canadian friend, but I have to do it according to our administrative process and the rules and regulations under which I have to operate, and I think he understands that. We are currently engaged in the environmental impact statement analysis, and analysis will be made with respect to the national interest ultimately, and we're just not at that point yet. I haven't received it. They haven't finished it. There were a lot of questions that were raised in all of the public comment period, and those comments have necessitated appropriate answers. The public has a role in this. We're all accountable to our publics. The democratic process demands that we do that. So we are doing it, and I can promise our friends in Canada that all the appropriate effort is being put into trying to get this done effectively and rapidly. And my hope is that before long that analysis will be available, and then my work begins.
If I could as well respond. This is obvious. John and I have had discussions about this in the past, and we'll be meeting bilaterally later today. Obviously, this is a tremendously important project for the future of prosperity of the Canadian economy. 26 months ago, Hillary Clinton called, explained the concerns that the administration had, particularly with the aquifer in Nebraska. We're pleased that the proponent has worked constructively with the state, realigned the pipeline, gone through the process. We hope the final State Department report is out in short order, and that the administration will be in a position to make a positive decision. This is a great project for the future economic prosperity of Canada. It's a great project that will create a lot of jobs here in the United States. It's a great project which will increase the energy security of our closest friend and ally, and we obviously want to see and look forward to a positive decision to energy security and a positive decision to job creation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.